be afraid of death. I'm 85. I know I'm going to die. I mean, that's real. And I know that 85 is an age in which many people die. 90, of course. So look forward to those years, whatever years that you have left, with that anticipation and opportunity to fill in exciting and rewarding ways. And don't be looking and worrying about the fact that you're going to die or you're going to get sick. And just live your life. Continue to live your life.
Welcome to the Zami Nobla National Organization of Black Lesbians on Aging podcast. We are your sound source for Black lesbian history. I'm your host, Angela Denise Davis. Last month, I interviewed Dr. Wilhelmina Perry from her home in New York City. As we are all sheltering in due to the coronavirus pandemic, she was very gracious to extend her time to talk to us about her life as an award-winning community activist, author, social worker, educator, and public speaker. She also shared information about her life with Dr. Antonia Pantoja, her colleague and partner of over 30 years. Whether talking about her formative years in Harlem, her life in Puerto Rico with Dr. Pantoja, or her work with homeless LGBT youth, Dr. Perry provides a wealth of information and inspiration. We also talked about her day-to-day life in one of the nation's epicenters of the coronavirus pandemic. We believe it is important to time capsule this experience and the ways older Black lesbians are dealing with this pandemic. I also want to note that Dr. Perry is a member of Zami Nobla, and now our conversation.
My name is Wilhelmina Perry. I'm 85 years old, and I show up in the world in ways that I hope represent who I am and represent with consistency. Politically conscious, Black, lesbian, senior.
Well, Dr. Perry, thank you so much for being our guest today on the Zami Nobla podcast. I was reading your bio, and you have an amazing history. You've done a lot in your 80-plus years, and I want to start just very briefly centering this interview with your talking about Harlem and growing up in New York.
Okay, I grew up in Harlem, and we were 8 children, my 2 parents and my grandmother. So we all occupied a 4-bedroom apartment in Harlem, where I was raised, and my parents actually stayed there until my dad died. He was about 71 when he died. So the history of my family in Harlem is a very long one, and it's a very involved one. I did not realize growing up that the Black principal that we had was the first Black principal in the city. And as an adult, I learned about her because a friend of mine was editor at I think it was the Journal of Negro History, I think they called it. And he had an article on her. And it so happens that she was actually an activist who had become this first principal. But I was talking to my sister the other day and realizing how fortunate we were as young kids growing up to have her there. She was there along with about 4 or 5 Black faculty. And there is no question in my mind that they contributed greatly to my sense of who I was as a black person, and the pride that I must carry with that label wherever I went. Before we moved to that apartment, we lived on 8th Avenue, underneath the overhead L, and not a lot of people remember that, and they will argue with me about the fact that there was no 8th Avenue L. There was an 8th Avenue L. We had a tenement apartment that we were poor because there were so many of us. And at night, people would come into the building and rattle the doors and come down the fire escape. So we were very happy to move to this new apartment because it was a step up. Dad worked 3 jobs to maintain us in that upgraded lifestyle, but we were very fortunate to be there. We grew up in a Harlem that was poor, but you had still the middle class that had not moved away and the professionals that had moved away. So it was, as I saw it, a very secure neighborhood. What we called our neighborhood probably consisted of about 4 blocks, and we knew each other in that small area. We knew the parents, we knew the children, and our parents knew each other. So it was a very secure, it was a very growth-producing, and most of the families like mine were middle-class aspiring. So for me, it was a very secure, a very important part of my life development and the way that I think now. My dad was the deacon in a Holiness Church, and my parents were all Pentecostal. My mother was Pentecostal, as was her side of the family. And Dad, we would travel with Dad to various church meetings around the East, particularly the eastern states. And my sister and I, she's older than I am, I'm the second oldest, we were known as the Ward girls, Deacon Ward's girls. And so we had a special place in that church. And we were, sort of nurtured into becoming the people that we would eventually become. Dad was very involved in the church. Not only was he a deacon, he was also a treasurer. But what I remember about his church experience was that he saw it as community, and we were taught that church is your family, church is your community. So I did not get from him or from my mother a lot of what I would call, what we know now as church dogma. We got this sense that the church belongs in the community, and you have a responsibility to the community, and the people in the church have a responsibility to your development. So we grew up, and we do little recitations and singing, and as I got older, organized like youth programs for the church. But so it was a very solid childhood, very enriching.
Well, when did you leave Harlem?
I left when I was, I would say, 18, 19 maybe. That was my first marriage. And I came back after that marriage broke up, which lasted maybe a year or 2 years. We were kids. And I stayed there maybe another 4 years, and then I left, and I was gone then for the rest of my adult life.
When you left Harlem, where did you go?
I first went to Philadelphia to live. I went to graduate school there, and then I moved to San Diego, and then I I lived in Baltimore for a while, and then I met my partner, and we stayed in San Diego, but then we moved to Puerto Rico, and then we came back to New York. I came back to New York, I remember that date, in 2000, because she died in 2004.
You touched on it a little bit as you talked about your early religious upbringing. There is this real vein of activism. At what point in your life did you catch hold to the flame that you were called to move in this way in the world?
Okay, I didn't mention it, and it's important that I do. My dad was a union person, and he was head of the first integrated union for the Pennsylvania Railroad in the commissary department. That's where he spent most of his life working. And he was very active in the community. In fact, he was the first male PTA president. And later, when we grew up and my mother returned to work, she was also very active in the union where she worked. So there was always this sense of community, activism, and faith. You know, not like dogma faith, but faith. And faith represented by certain values and commitments you had to other people as you walked life. So, you know, that combination of things, you are Black, you have to be proud of being Black. If you work hard, you can succeed. However, you must remember that if you succeed, some of it has to do with luck.
I want to stop and pause and talk about this 30-year love relationship you had with your partner and how the two of you all met and how you were able to create a life together of activism.
Okay, I was teaching social work at the Cal State San Diego State University. And Tony came in from New York. She had moved from New York because of bad asthma, so she came and she taught there. And we were both teaching together. At that time, I'm going to get a little personal, I was married and she was in a relationship. And our relationship started as colleagues. And I was so impressed with her mind and her values. And I was thinking to myself, you know, I think I was 40. I've never met a woman like this, you know, and had this kind of intimate experience with the person who was thinking like I was thinking and who was a social worker. Remember, we were both social workers. A social worker who was feeling the same about the criticism of the field and what needed to be done and whether or not we could change it, and if we couldn't change it, what should we be doing. And over time in this professional work relationship, you know, I realized I'm in love with her. And that, of course, was a big earth-shaking realization for both of us. And make a long story short, I was not in a good marriage. It had been gone for some time. I had been invited to come to New York for a year teaching in the School of Social Work here. Actually, it wasn't so much teaching as it was setting up the graduate program. And so I was already out of the marriage for a year and then returned back to California to continue teaching. We decided that we would be together. We thought so much alike. She had been working in New York, and she had developed I guess, about 5 Puerto Rican institutions, and many of them continue to live today. So she had her own reputation as a community activist, as an institution builder, as a person who had been in community for years and years working. And it was just like we belonged together.
I love hearing people talk about their relationships, particularly ones that have the longevity as yours had, 30 years, because so many Black lesbians, younger ones, and even older women don't necessarily have that model of being able to look at a 30-year relationship and understand just the power and the beauty of loving someone for that long.
Well, it's interesting because I sometimes talk to young people, and I reflect on my past relationships with men and also now the relationship with Tony. And for me, there's something so distinct about being in a relationship with a woman, the way that you understand each other, in the way that you probably, although different culture or nationality groups or racial groups, that there are similar experiences that you have had growing up as women. And if you're lucky to be able to love as 2 women love, I think that is something that's so beautiful. It's funny because after she died, I had my own, personal kind of emotional collapse and wound up in therapy for a couple of years. And it was really through the therapy and reflecting on my relationship with her as well as my own background and how I got into a relationship with a woman that I could sort of pull out of memory in very vivid ways that I had been having relationships with women all my life. Not so much as women, but as growing up as young adults, and even earlier than that as children. But I had never put a name to it, and I had never labeled it. I came up before really Audre Lorde and the whole, Black lesbian movement. There was no name for it. We knew what we knew in my, I think it was junior high school or high school, that there were these girls that hung out with each other, but they were dykes. and you stayed away from them, and just be sure not to go in the bathroom with them because they will rape you, So that was the image of what it meant to be in a same gender relationship. But other models, I didn't know. Remember, I grew up in the church. We were very guarded and protected. I couldn't even go to the movies until I was an adult. I couldn't wear makeup, I couldn't go to dances, I couldn't go to parties. So this whole movement of feminism and of lesbianism, was someplace else as far as I was concerned. So it was through this therapy. I said, oh, yeah, that's what you were doing. That's what you were all about. You should save yourself a whole lot of trouble and not got married twice, and just jump to adulthood with a woman. But you see, I am also a representative of the group of women that come out at 40, 50, and there are many of us. And also, as you well know, that there are many lesbians with children that bring into the relationship with a woman their own children. So that means men were somewhere in the picture.
Yes.
So I think a lot of us stumbled through, until we finally got it. This is where you belong. This is the relationship that you should be in. When Tony died, we called her Tony. My younger sister said to me, well, are you going to go back to men now? I said, no, I'm committed for life to women.
lifelong lesbian.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting to me because as you talk about your Pentecostal holiness background and being a clergy person, I understand what that looks like. So I'm intrigued at how you processed your religious faith with your sexual orientation and this 30-year relationship with the love of your life. How did religion massage itself through that part of your life?
Remember that for me, we had aunts that was deep in the dogma of religion, but my parents did not represent that to us. And the rule in the household was you had to go to church until you were at least 16 years old. Like that, just automatically. I don't know why. And you had a choice. You could go to the big church or you could go to Sunday school. So me and my sister and I were these almost adult young women in Sunday school. And we knew that was the turn-off date. Now, of course, you're steeped in this religion, so you may stop attendance, but you don't fully stop it. I mean, this has been your life. This was my life. Mm-hmm. I went for a while after 16, let us say, but slowly decided, especially college years, this religion, the way that I've been brought up in it, makes no sense to me anymore. So I'm getting out of it. However, I remember very clearly, and I tell people this because I don't do so much anymore, but I've done a lot of faith and sexuality workshops. It really took me, I would say, about 4 years to get over the fear that God would strike me dead if I turned away from religion. And it was a painful process, and it was a long process. But I finally got to the point that I could, separate myself from it. And I have already realized that I have taken certain values from it. So I'm going. And I left. And I really did not return to church until Tony died, which was 2004. Mm-hmm. And I returned because I was so desperate and suicidal and just, I decided maybe I could find peace in religion. Mm. So I went to Riverside Church, where I no longer go, incidentally, but I went to Riverside Church because I was aware they had an LGBT ministry. It never occurred to me to be guilty over the relationship with Tony, although she used to say, there you go, your Pentecostal self. And I guess that I still, have some of it in me, but it never occurred to me to be guilty or ashamed of it. Mm-hmm. And then when my father, actually, I introduced her to my parents. They knew her because they knew of her reputation and the work she had done in New York. And my dad said to me, you finally met an equal.
Wow.
And for this guy who was a deacon at a Pentecost in a holiness church to say that. Mm-hmm. And from then on, everything was great. She was accepted into the family. And, they may have said things behind my back, behind her back. But never did I feel that there was any, ostracizing us or being critical or anything.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, where's your membership now?
I belong to Rivers Living Waters, and it's part of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries of Bishop Flunder.
Okay.
Yvette Flunder. It's a Pentecostal experience, and that is, that makes sense to me at this point.
Yes, it seems like it's almost a way of returning home in a different way.
It is, which Riverside did not feel like.
Yes.
Well, my partner, well, of course, like many from Puerto Rico, grew up at that point Catholic, but had rejected not only that teaching, but religion in general. So we never attended a church. But it's interesting because before she died, I said to her, we have to have something more than our activism. I'm paraphrasing now, I don't remember exactly, but this is the gist of it. We have to have something more than our activism that we believe in. We have to have like something deeper. That's all I said to her, because she was like agnostic. Don't tell me anything about religion. But I had that sense, that because we used to call ourselves socialists or social democrats, and she had been to Nicaragua, and we both had been to Cuba. And so we had that political. But I said to her, we need something more. And she said, okay, I'll go to church with you. Of course, she died before that became real. But over time, I began to realize that I had imposed a political ideology on top of a religious faith. And that what really gave me my values was my faith, my religious training, more than any political ideology. So I was very comfortable with that understanding coming back into church as a regular contributing member. There was no conflict for me. And now if I'm asked, well, how does all this activism come about? How do you, because I call myself a radical. One of my blogs is I am a radical. I will tell you very directly, if you ask me that, I will say it's my faith, it's my religious teaching that have brought me to this point.
I'm intrigued with the work that you have done with that vein of activism and radicalism to help LGBT youth, specifically those who have been without homes, and really the intergenerational work you've done. A lot of older folks would look at younger folks and say, I just don't understand them. And I don't feel like extending the type of energy to work with young people. But that's certainly not something you've done. How is it that you started working with young people, and what's the zeal for intergenerational work that you have?
Well, Tony had developed a national organization called Lesbian. That means to aspire, and it was designed for Puerto Rican youth. To take them out of what was happening in New York, the gang structure, the road to prison, and to offer them developmental experiences, educational experiences, and then move them into higher education. It's a very successful program. So she brought that into the relationship, but I have been working with a group in San Diego, a Black nationalist group, and I had developed an alternative school program. So we both, had a commitment to young people. And then when we worked together, we developed an alternative educational institution. It started out as an accrediting institution. We got a license to operate in California, and then because of the expectation of the students that somehow we were going to give away degrees, we got disenchanted and decided we're not going to work on degrees. We're going to go change the model of the institution, and we will work around this country and in Puerto Rico, developing leadership and working with people in their communities. So we spent several years traveling around the United States in different communities. So, and this group of people that we worked with were always younger people. We have also done the graduate school had an art program, mostly young artists. I had developed a program in entrepreneurship for young people. So always young people were around me, around her, and we believed in the power of young people. I was watching President Obama on his on the station tonight. He spoke, and we forget that it has always been young people that have moved the country and created change, as were the civil rights people. So for me, to work with a younger population is exciting and also powerful. And it is really, I will tell you honestly, it's probably only in the last 5 years or 4 years that I think of myself as old. Neither Tony or myself, and Tony was 12 years older than I was. We did not think of ourselves as old. We thought of ourselves as young. So there wasn't that major age division, that a lot of us seniors. And, I still have seniors, friends that are critical of young people. They're probably talking about this revolt and saying all kinds of things about the young kids out there looting and blah, blah. I never felt that way. I always felt that this was a population that had the potential to change the world, and if in any way I could lend resources and my experience to facilitating that, well, this is where I want to be. I didn't get involved in LGBT activism because she working with young people and my doing work in San Diego with young people, we just felt like you can't come out and say, I'm a lesbian. They're not going to let you stay. In fact, I had an experience. I was asked to give, because I was very active in the Black community in San Diego. As a faculty person, I was asked to give a statement or something on a particular day, and I started off by saying, I'm a Black feminist. Honey, I was expelled from my Black nationalist community. So, it wasn't the kind of thing you said like that, although we lived our life. We thought we lived our life openly as a same-gender couple, same-gender loving. It was after she died, and I then, got involved in the work that I was doing with kids because marriage equality was hot, but it wasn't resolved. I just felt that there's no Black face I see here. And there's no seniors I see here. And I've just gone through this experience. I lost my partner. I had to be concerned with all kinds of legal matters. I was involved in a grief group. They were all white. I was the only Black, and I was the only female. And they were talking about how kids had come in to take away the cars, and the family wanted to put them out of the second home. They were all wealthy. I was not.
Wow.
And I thought, these are the stories that have to be told about why marriage equality and legal protections are important. So I was invited to a local temple as part of a panel to do a speech, and I asked my grief group, do you mind if I tell our stories? And they said no, so they all came with me, and I started off saying, I'm here to represent as a Black lesbian survivor of a 30-year relationship, and to put that face into, that a lot of people didn't like it. The newspaper went crazy. They loved it. But the other panelists were not happy because everybody was young and they were starting families. And I had no objection to their story. But I just felt, if you're talking about marriage, you're talking about legal protection. And, once Edie Windsor took her case to court, then they understood, right? Because she was an older person who had a problem with the survivorship having been in this long-term unprotected relationship. So I got involved that way. Make a long story short, I went to Riverside Church after her death. I became the head of the LGBT ministry, and through that I began to, because I'm an activist, I began to look at the LGBT community, what's going on here. And then this problem of these young people, homeless LGBT people, I started studying it. I brought into the church this interest. I did workshops. I brought in guests. And then I just got involved more so in homeless LGBT youth and started working in that field.
What type of changes have you seen since then and now?
Listen, when I started, they were saying in New York City there were 4,000. If you pick up anything today, they'll tell you 4,000. So the count is off. They say they try to get a realistic count. But how can it be from when I started in 2002 to now, it's the same number? It's nonsense. And when people ask me, do you see improvement? You know what I say? When you tell me that those kids are no longer on the streets as they are, then I will tell you there's improvement. And once I got really involved in this field, this is what the people working in the field were not saying, as well as the major institutions. I learned that their majority were Black and Latino kids. And I said to myself, hey, this has to be exposed. Right. We as communities have to know this, because these are our kids out there in the street. And we cannot know this, because I'm going to tell you and then turn you back and do nothing about it. Of course, I think that the rhetoric is not out there so hateful anymore, but I cannot say that we're doing, as a community, doing anything about it, because those numbers don't change. We're like 80% of the population that's LGBT out there homeless.
There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And certainly what we see now in 2020, this June of 2020, is that there are a lot of folks who are in the streets talking about the work that needs to be done. We just mentioned the young people who are protesting, and we're in the midst of a pandemic that seems to have a lot of folks rearing up ageist dialogue about who needs to be present. I mean, you take your pick. There's so much going on currently. I want to massage some of that and just talk about in the midst of this global pandemic, where we're also seeing this uprising of protest against white supremacy and bigotry in our nation, certainly. What is your response to this idea that older people can be sacrificed for the good of the country? And frankly, that's what some people have said.
Before I answer that, let me just add to something I've just said. I would be willing to bet you that a number of those young people out are homeless young people, because the availability of shelter or beds or even affordable apartments in New York City does not exist for them.
Yes.
And so where are they? I have a friend who runs a shelter. What also happens is that the monies that the municipal or the state give are given in categories of age. So, for instance, she takes from 18 to 24, which is a population that's generally not funded. And how many kids at 18-year-old do you know that are out ready to take charge of their lives? Okay, so they need some protective care until at least 24. School, what about school? Because most of them haven't finished school, and so forth. And that's a long story. When the pandemic started, because I like to keep on top of what's happening around me. And I've always been that kind of person. My dad was that kind of person too. I felt like my responsibility as a social worker was always to have the information of resources and information, that was part of my bag of tools to bring to people. And if I couldn't bring that, what the heck was I doing in their lives? So I began to hear over and over, it's the seniors. And then I thought, well, who's seniors? Who's seniors? Who are these seniors? And started searching for demographics of the seniors. And at that point, the Black Caucus and a couple of the elected officials, maybe the NAACP, had begun to talk about the fact that we need demographics on people. And there was more a sort of an intuitive feeling that the majority of the people were Black and Latinos. Now the data is there, but when I started kind of talking about it, Marianne and I had conversations, there wasn't any real hard data, but then it quickly began to come.
For individuals who are
dying.
Yes, dying. Individuals who are dying of COVID-19, yes.
Yes. And I started, I'm going to research this, this whole area. And I noticed this first lieutenant governor in Texas said, well, it's the older people and I'm willing to die, for the economy. I said, oh, what is he saying? Let me see who else is saying anything like this. I began to search, and there were evangelical conservative clergy beginning to echo this. And I said, oh, this is very dangerous, because what is going to be made a public messaging is it's older people, and it's Black and Latino older people. So these categories that are indispensable. But furthermore, they are the ones running up the numbers, and they are the ones who are causing all the problems for us, because once they're dying, then the numbers are growing and growing and growing, and the pandemic becomes more and more visible and more problematic. So let's just get rid of them. We can send them out to do the essential work, or we can just let them die and forget it. So I thought, oh, that's me. That's me and my friends. I'm the oldest person, that I kind of associate with, and no, the others are younger. But I said, that's us. They're willing to sacrifice us, because we're seniors, because we're Black and Latino. And then the third theme, this was the radio program I did, the three themes floating around, and I was able to document all of them. The third one is the gays. We are being punished as a society by God because we're so gay friendly and because we're so gay liberal. And the pandemic is a way of punishing us. So that was three strikes against us. So I invited Marianne and another friend to come together, and we decided we would do this radio program over one of the popular radio stations. Marianne talked about the demographics. I talked about the themes that I saw, the danger of the themes. And then the other person talked about the intergenerational activity that was going on in the Black community in particular around the needs and issues in the pandemic.
You live in the epicenter of all that's going on for so long. New York City was on the news every day, and it was just very frightful to see what was happening there. Tell us a little bit about your experience in the midst of this pandemic, of being in New York, and what that's been like for you.
Well, I went in lock-in back in March, and I have basically been in lock-in except for in the last month or so. I have had to go out to do bank business, but I have been basically shut myself in like most of the seniors that I know.
And our listeners should know that today is June 4th, 2020. So you've been in for a very long time.
I'm fortunate. I have a small apartment, 1 bedroom, but it's still about 900 square feet. My condo development has a small garden that I can see from my window. I started a routine of exercise. I can walk down in the garden, and I usually go in the evening and walk around the garden, sometimes 5 times just to walk. I went out today to the store that's in my complex, and I can't walk. I don't know how to walk anymore. Because I do have neuropathy of the feet from diabetes. One of those chronic problems that many seniors have. But I realized early I had to establish routine.
Yes.
I couldn't just collapse my life, so to speak. So I exercise, and I have always hated exercise, but I get up every morning and I will do an hour of exercise.
Wow.
I also, I have to get up in the morning and get dressed. Not stay in pajamas. I sometimes do that now because this thing has lasted so long. But get up and get dressed, and have things on your calendar. There are lots of Zoom activities now. It just amazes me how people have developed, the social media in the place of physical contact. So I have a calendar again. But I would say basically routine. I had to learn where and how to shop online for my food. And then not only my food, I had to make sure that disinfectants and toilet paper and paper towels, that were no longer abundant. And I did not plan to be in the house this long, so I had to figure out where I was going to get all those things.
Right.
And this actually was a lot of work, and I'm not the only one who had to do this. We had to shop online at different locations, something as simple as plastic gloves, and then it was the mask. But now my life is settled on that. I have a routine. I know where I can buy my food. The church came by a couple of times. Senior delivery came a couple of times. But now I'm able to shop, through the basic stores I use on a consistent basis. I'm getting a little stir crazy because it's long. It's been a long time. And then I had to make sure I stayed in contact with people by social media or by telephone, not to isolate. I lost a very good church friend a few weeks ago. He died alone. And, that I think is the fear when I speak to my friends that most of us have. You could die in your apartment alone. And because of the virus, nobody will go to the hospital. Nobody is there. And this has been a big preoccupation that I have. We have lost a lot of seniors. We have lost the history that they carry. We have lost culture. We have lost tradition. We haven't even had a chance to realize the meaning of that.
Right.
And when this is all over, we're going to have to deal with the trauma of that loss in the general way, but also the personal experience of loss that people had, and how they could not handle that as we traditionally have handled the loss of a loved one.
Right.
They couldn't even be there. So, I still have a couple of projects that I work on, and I keep bringing this particular concern into that work. how do we prepare and how do we pick up whatever scar and whatever hurt and whatever loss we have to come to grips with once we're functioning.
Yeah, I think when the smoke clears, there's going to be a lot of work to do. And what's so scary is we don't know when the smoke is going to clear.
I'm concerned that the street activity can stir up. They're mostly young people. Those that I have seen in my social media spots have been in masks. But I think 3 weeks, we're saying 3 weeks to see whether or not a new wave of COVID is going to show up.
Right.
I hope not, but I think that is a possibility. I had personally decided, although New York is opening up, and I think the middle of June, the plan is to open even more. I, along with friends of mine, seniors, decided we're not going out for sure until the end of July. So that's a month beyond what would be official opening. And if it has kicked up again, that means even longer.
If you had the opportunity to be in conversation with one of those young folks on the street who are protesting for freedom and equality in this country, what would you say?
Well, I support you, and I thank you. And if it were not for the pandemic and my feet are killing me, I would be out there with you, as I have been out to demonstrations until last summer. I'm glad that you're there. I would hope that you understand what is happening now with the murder and the police brutality in terms of the larger picture of systemic institutional racism and economic oppression that we live under, and that as you continue your protest and even beyond it, that you not settle for police training, let us say, or now they're talking about getting the records of the police, the behavioral records. No, I would say to them, these are tinkerings. What you want is a systemic addressing of the oppressive nature of our police forces that are supposed to be serving us. And while you're doing this, that you challenge the society to look at how you're going to work as an adult and how you and others are going to be educated so that you can function fully in the resources of the country. And, from my perspective, I think the economic structure, the capitalism, does not work and cannot work. So you have to be thinking about what you're going to do about that. And voting, I'm getting involved now in a voter registration project. The streets are important, but the ballot box is important. So you have to take this energy and vote. And I'm concerned that young people and Black and Latino young people don't feel enthusiastic about voting. So I'm getting involved in a voter registration project where we will be in Black and Latino neighborhoods.
We're in a very crucial place right now.
Very crucial. Very, very crucial.
We've been talking about some really heavy stuff.
I talk all the time.
What are as we get ready to come to a close in a little bit, I just want to talk about the joy, because there's a lot of heaviness with what we're dealing with in our world today, but we also are alive and we're doing things that bring us joy and have the capacity to be in community with folks in different ways, and not necessarily the way in which we probably would like to, but certainly technology has made it possible for us to stay in connection. My question for you is, what's the joy of being a Black lesbian at 85?
I surround myself with several young people, couples, but single people who are also lesbians. They bring me enormous joy. I try not to be in any way a burden or, moving too rapidly or too fully into their lives. But they are my friends, and we have opportunities. We don't now, but in the past, have dinner together, or one young woman had actually come and stayed with me for several weeks as she was transitioning to her own place. I see them, and I don't preach to them, but I do share with them, and I do offer advice, because I find that in my own life, it has not always been my parents who gave me advice. My mother went to high school but didn't complete, and Dad didn't go probably beyond elementary school, in spite of all the things that he accomplished. So I have always had adults in my life that I have kind of adopted. I used to say, I wish she were my mother,
Mm-hmm.
And so I know the importance of having extensions to parental supports. And that's the role that I try to play in their life. And they just give me enormous joy. They allow me to be in their lives. And that, for me, is so wonderful. I mean, so wonderful. And it's not like, hundreds of young people, but, let us say 10, and couples, and they keep into contact with me. How are you doing? In fact, I have to arrange now for a Zoom date with one of them. We can't get together in person. So that brings me enormous joy. My church community brings me joy.
The final question I always ask my guest is there anything we left out? There is a listening audience of older Black lesbians and allies and a lot of other folks who listen to the podcast. Is there something that you want to say that maybe I didn't ask the right question to provoke it?
To those who are in my age category and even younger, I have some who are just retiring, who recently retired, who are friends. Do not isolate yourself. It's very easy to isolate yourself. And in many ways, the ism that I have experienced most in my life is sexism. That you have to, I would say to them, you have to challenge others to see what you bring and the value you are. Do not isolate yourself. Maintain your contacts. Maintain your intellectual curiosity. Continue to grow. Don't get so stuck in your ways that you can't take in new ideas and new things. And keep busy, and most importantly, challenge your mind and challenge yourself to experience new things. It's only in the last year the pandemic has interrupted. I had been rehearsing for a dance performance with one of my younger friends. And I also was invited because I put out in the airwaves. I want to develop my creative self, so I did my blog, and I'm writing poetry. I've done a couple of poetry readings, and also I put out there I would like to do something creative. So I was invited to be in a play. that I have trouble now memorizing all the lines. But that was rescheduled for October. So that's what I would say. What have you always wanted to do? Do it. Don't be in a situation where you're on death's door and you haven't done things that you have wanted to do. So do that. Figure out what it is that you have not been able to do, and just do it. And also, most important to me, I just did a blog on this. Don't be afraid of death. I'm 85. I know I'm going to die. I mean, that's real. And I know that 85 is an age in which many people die. 90, of course. So look forward to those years, whatever years that you have left, with that anticipation and opportunity to fill in exciting and rewarding ways. And don't be looking and worrying about the fact that you're going to die or you're going to get sick. And just live your life. Continue to live your life.
That's a word. Thank you. Dr. Wilhelmina Perry, you are our joy. Thank you so much for being part of our Black lesbian history.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure talking with you. It's been a pleasure. Now I'm all worked up.
I had such a wonderful time being in conversation with Dr. Perry. She provides a glimpse into the joys and complexities of aging and encourages us to embrace life to the fullest, regardless of whatever age we are, and to make sure that we are in community with others and that we continue to kindle our creative flame. And I hope that you too were inspired by Dr. Perry's words. As we close out today, I want to encourage you to give us feedback and comments wherever you find the podcast. And if you want to contact me directly, you can do that by emailing podcast@zaminobla.org. I close today with a poem by Michelle Brown. She was a guest of ours earlier this year. She wrote and dedicated a poem to Dr. Perry that was presented at an awards ceremony where Dr. Perry was honored. When I interviewed Michelle, she shared the poem with us, and I found it to be very poignant. A great opportunity to sit in reflection and think about aging, legacy, community, not falling into isolation, and making sure that you're connected in every way possible so that you're remembered. And check our show notes for a link to an interview that Michelle did with Dr. Perry.
Who will know? Who will know? Know that while I still walk, my pace has slowed a bit. I stop to smell the roses, watch the seasons change, that I arrive a little late, no longer painfully punctual, just a little late, with stories to tell of things I saw along the way. Who will know? The stories I tell again and again, listening patiently, giving me a loving nudge when I get stuck along the way. The words hanging on the tip of my tongue, reminding me of my memories when my words begin to fail. Who will know that I need a helping hand when my cozy clutter has become just a mess? Maybe looking a little disheveled or even unkempt, when my pride keeps me from saying, I can't, so I hide. simply staying inside, living alone, being alone, because I'm alone. Who will know when time is running short? Help me savor every moment. Take one more walk in the sun and rain. Listen to my stories, helping fill in all the holes. Share another laugh, another dance, another hug, another tear. Who will know when I'm ready to cross over, to face that grand adventure, to face what's to come, to remind me my work is over, remind me that I have loved and am loved. Then, as we listen to music, just sit and hold my hand. Who will know? And so I wrote that and dedicated it to the first person who had this conversation with me, Dr. Wilhelmina Perry. And when she won an Esteem Award, at that award, I read that and dedicated it again to her and sent her a copy.